Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have something a little bit different. This is a more casual podcast style video. So tomorrow, in case you were not aware, is the War of 04. It is the second edition of this major 2004 tournament that we are playing on TCG 1. Go check it out, register if you want to play. If you want to check out the broadcast, I will actually be commentating alongside my good friend Kara Aquarin on twitch.tv/the War of 04. The links to both the tournament and the stream will be in the description if you want to check it out. So, as I've been thinking about the format a lot last night, I had the brilliant idea to come up with a tier list for how I think the current 04 meta is looking and how I think it will shape out as we look to tomorrow's tournament. So I spent way too long putting together pictures representing all of the archetypes that I have deemed significant enough to be put onto a tier list. So there are 36 different decks that I have come up with. There may be more, I don't know. But actually, is it 36? It says 36, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's 36. So there we go. There are possibly other archetypes that I've missed. There may be some archetypes that you think I should not have included here. Basically, my criteria for this was thinking of all of the decks that I know are significant to the 04 metagame, as well as some more historical lists that have been deemed important enough to be listed on websites such as PTCG Legends. And I also threw on a couple archetypes that I have seen folks playing on TCG1 that I think are interesting and have enough potential to be worth considering for this metagame. So, without further ado, let's go into this. Now, I have 6 tiers on this tier list, and here is how the tiers will look. So I am primarily ranking these decks based on how I think they can do in a tournament. So S tier is decks that are extremely, extremely good. I think these are the most likely decks to win the tournament of any tournament you would play. I think these are the most likely decks. A tier is really good decks. If you're A tier, you are a really, really, really good deck. B tier is good decks that have some sort of flaw to them. So typically, if a deck ends up in B tier, it's because it has a tough matchup to at least one of the decks in A or S tier. C tier are decks that I think you could play in a tournament and do okay. So if you did play these in a tournament, maybe I wouldn't expect you to be able to win the whole thing, but I think you will do all right. I don't think you're necessarily guaranteed to get stomped out. We'll end up seeing a lot of legacy 04 decks that were played more so back in the day will show up in B and C tier. And then D and F are decks that I do not think you should play in a tournament. So D tier is I do not recommend playing this in a tournament. I really don't recommend it. F tier is you maybe should never play this deck, period, either casually or in a tournament. So those are my tiers. We can talk more about them as we go along. And starting off, we will have the first deck up, which is our good old friend Aqua. So Aqua, unfortunately, is already going to start us off in the D tier. Aqua is a fan favorite. I know several folks that adore this deck and want it to work so bad. And I've seen Aqua win games of Pokemon before. I've even lost to it a couple times. But overall, Aqua is just not a deck that I see succeeding in a tournament. It doesn't have the same sort of firepower that Magma does. The conditions to satisfy Kyogre's attack are less likely to be guaranteed. And the Aqua support Pokemon, while similar to Magma, are weaker in their own ways. In particular, Seviper is an unfortunate card in terms of having a really bad second attack. Manectric and Lantern are cool and they are good in their own right, but I just don't see how that makes Aqua as a deck viable enough in tournament. With that said, I think we might see a couple Aquas show up in the War of 04. People really do love this deck, so maybe we'll see it show up, but I think there's something better for you to play if you want this style of deck. All right, Blaziken Ditto. So this is the new modern version of Blaziken that we have been seeing played in the last couple years. It combines the sheer firepower of Firestarter Blaziken and Blaziken EX alongside Ditto from Skyridge to shore up your Gorebyss matchup, which is a Pokemon that we have seen become very popular in the metagame. I think Blaziken Ditto is S tier. I think this is the single deck that is most likely to win the War of 04. Blaziken is already phenomenal. Ditto does an amazing job at giving you extra versatility against Gorebyss, and I think that this is the way to play Blaziken if you want to win a tournament. So it is a phenomenal deck, and I think it has a great shot at winning the War of 04. I am ranking this as the best deck in the format right now. Next up, we have Blaziken Rayquaza. I'm using this to represent the more classic style of Blaziken EX that we may have seen back in the day. So the Worlds list, for example, which plays the Blaziken, the Aqua's Manectric, the Rayquaza EX. The idea here is that the Rayquaza EX just does a ridiculous amount of damage that not even Blaziken EX can necessarily provide. Now, this is still a good deck. It's still a great deck. However, I do think Rayquaza has some downsides compared to the Blaziken Ditto variant. This list is a lot less streamlined. You are playing Rayquaza, you're playing Manectric. Some lists are also playing Blossom. There's just a lot of things going on here that makes your deck a bit less consistent, a bit less straightforward. Additionally, Ditto as a Pokemon has become very popular in the metagame. Of course, Blaziken Ditto is the most common choice, but other decks are playing Ditto as well. I've seen Gardevoir decks playing Ditto. My Swampert list plays Ditto, and even other Gorebyss lists can also play Ditto. Basically, any deck that can accelerate energy in any way probably wants to be playing a Ditto in it. Ditto is a very natural counter to Rayquaza EX. You just need 2 energy attached to your Ditto and you're one-shotting your Rayquaza EX. So because of that, I do not think Blaziken Rayquaza is as good as Blaziken Ditto. However, I still think it's a good deck. It's still Blaziken at the end of the day. I'm going to put it in A tier, but it'll be on the lower end of the A tier. All right, next up we have Blaziken Salamence. So this is another fan favorite. People love Salamence. They want it to be good. I just don't see it. I've played against Salamence many times, and I've usually won. Salamence as a card is just too underwhelming for me, and it takes up so much space for its effect. Having an unconditional gust in 2004 is crazy, and that is by far the biggest benefit to Salamence. But Blaziken EX already snipes anyway, so the gusting isn't even as powerful in a Blaziken deck as it might be paired with some other partner. So Blaziken Salamence, while again another fan favorite, I'm also going to put it in the D tier. I do not recommend playing this version. You really should just be playing any other Blaziken deck possible. Okay, next up is BLG. This is the first of many Gorebyss lists that we are seeing grace this format. So BLG is Banette, Lantern, Gorebyss. So there are many different ways to play Lantern and Gorebyss. You can either play just Lantern Gorebyss, or you can pair them with Banette or Medicham, which we will see later down the line. So BLG is a great deck. It is a Gorebyss deck, and it's a Lantern deck. So already that is a big benefit in its favor. I personally do not love Banette as much as Medicham as a partner for Lantern and Gorebyss. Gorebyss is already getting nice numbers with your psychic energies, but sometimes you need super, super big numbers to close out a game that not even Gorebyss can hit. Banette doesn't really do that. So there are decks that do play special energy, mainly Magma with all its special energy. Blaziken lists nowadays are playing many, many warp energy. Even old school lists play the multi-energy as well. You have other Gorebyss decks that do play your special energy as well. So I think Banette as a Pokemon is really good into other Gorebyss decks to easily one-shot a Gorebyss, and it can also clean up Pokemon such as Blaziken EX. But I prefer having the extreme firepower that a Chakra Points might provide. So BLG is a great deck. It's Lantern, it's Gorebyss, you can't go wrong. However, I am going to put it in the B tier. I think it just doesn't have the same type of firepower that a Gorebyss deck would want to put it over the edge against other huge decks. Also, even though Bannet is a Psychic type, it's not doing anything in the Muk matchup because although Muk is Psychic weak, it doesn't play Special Energy, and Shadow Chant, I believe is what it's called, the second attack for Bannet, places damage counters. It does not deal damage. So Bannet is not actually helping you versus Muk. Okay, next up we have Cradily. Cradily is an interesting card to me. I have seen this card do very nasty things. And I think in the hands of a good pilot, Cradily can do very, very well. With that said, I also think there is a lot of opportunity to play around Cradily. Many decks play some sort of switching effects already due to the prevalence of effects like Dunsparce that auto or any other paralysis effects. So it's not super challenging to get out of Cradily's retreat lock, and you can also just bench your relevant attackers to get you there. I think Cradily as a deck really relies on it preys on your opponent playing a Dunsparce down and then being able to disrupt them from there. Of course, Cradily still has its own benefits. It is a very unique deck, and as I said, I have seen it do very nasty things, especially to me. So I think Cradily, while it's not tier 1, I don't even know if I would call it tier 2. I do think Cradily is viable enough to play in a tournament. I think if you have a good Cradily player showing up to the War of 04, they can definitely wreak some havoc. So for that, I'm going to place Cradily in the C tier. Next up, we have Crobat, the second of our Gorebyss archetypes. So this is the classic Crobat Gorebyss deck. Crobat is a really cool Pokemon. Triple Poison can shred through big HP Pokemon like nothing, and Crobat is able to play a Disruption package with heavy copies of Desert Ruins and ATM Rock, and being able to take advantage of Crobat's Flutter Trick to tear apart your opponent's hand even further. So I think Crobat is a great deck. We have seen it reach success in the previous tournaments. We saw it make top 8 at the War of 04, and Jack Merton got second with Crobat at the 2001 Win-A-Box tournament that Jay held. So, sorry, 2021 is what I meant to say. 2021 tournament that Jay held, Jack got second with Crobat. I think it's a great deck. It's very fun to play. It's a very solid Gorebyss archetype. I think it will be one of the more popular Gorebyss variants. With that said, I do think that Crobat just, again, it's about the firepower, and it's about the fact that Crobat having 90 HP, while that is a lot, it's not enough to deal with the fact that Flutter Trick is not reliable enough. Again, I really like Crobat. I think it's a great choice for this tournament. I'm going to put it in the B tier for being a good deck, but just not quite reaching that A threshold. Okay, so next up we have all of the Exploud variants. So Exploud as a card is really cool. It's this really great spread deck, and it's super fun to play. It's super fun to watch. Having 4 attacks is always really cool. There have been a couple different attempts at playing Exploud. While it is a great card, it does have a couple weaknesses. Of course, the main weakness is that it is weak to fighting. So this gives you a very tough Magma matchup, as well as Swampert as well. So that's his biggest problem. It has a couple partners. I'm actually going to start with the Why Not variant. So this is the classic version. We saw that William Hung played this. I believe he won a state with it. And this was kind of the Exploud variant that got carried through the years up until today. Why Not and Wobbuffet are pretty solid. It's a nice engine to getting your board set up. Exploud as a deck is not one that wants to rely on Dunsparce if it can, so having Why Not as an option is great. However, the downside of Why Not is that you are playing Psychic Energy, and by playing Psychic as your basic energy, this gives you a much harder time against Gorebyss. So for that, I will be placing Exploud Why Not in C tier. You can still play it and succeed, but I would exercise a lot of caution because of the Psychic energies. Okay, so speaking of weaknesses, next up is Exploud Sceptile, which is a deck that I created with Kara maybe a year or two ago. Yeah, like a year ago. And we actually got to see it be played at the War of 04. It finished 4-2. So the idea of Exploud Sceptile is that you try to deal with Exploud's fighting weakness by playing a grass attacker. And it turns out that Sceptile from Ruby Sapphire is somehow the best option that grass has, which is kind of crazy. So Solar Beam is 5 energy for 70. And that is enough to one-shot a Groudon. That is enough to almost one-shot a Swampert. And the Lizard Poison attack on Sceptile is really cool as well. Additionally, you can play Energy Trans Sceptile, which will give your Pokemon Nurse and Bryonies more strength to be able to keep healing your Exploud. While Sceptile does have all these benefits, it's at the cost of more consistency issues. You're adding another Stage 2 line to a deck that already is stretched thin for rare candies and draw cards as well. I love Exploud Sceptile. I do think it is good enough to be played in a tournament. However, if I'm looking at this realistically, I think you will need a little bit of luck on your side in order to actually succeed in the tournament. Again, it is possible, but I do think Exploud Sceptile belongs in the C tier. Lastly, Exploud Beedrill. So this is a variant that tries to use Beedrill's effect to paralyze the opponent's active Pokemon and then spread with Breaking Sound. We have seen this attack. We have seen this deck be played by, I want to say, High Flyer. It was the same person that played this archetype in both 04 tournaments. I believe they went 3-3 both times. So clearly it's good enough to not be in D or F tier. However, at the end of the day, again, it's another Stage 2 line. And now you have to play your Retro Energy as well. And there's this whole engine for your Beedrills. So I am always curious to see how this deck plays. It always seems like it has enough potential to beat the better decks and to succeed. Once again, I will be putting it in the C tier. So all these Exploud variants, I think you will be totally fine playing Exploud at the War of 04, just maybe closer to a 3-3 or 4-2 record rather than necessarily making top 8. All right, next up we have Gorebyss. So this is Gardevoir Gorebyss. This is by far the most aggressive of the Gorebyss variants. So Gorebyss is very aggro, just go, go, go. Get your Mystic Waters out as soon as possible, spam the board with energy, and win. I think Gorebyss is a wonderful deck. The sheer speed of Gorebyss, as well as the ability to attack Psychic Weak Pokemon, such as Mucky X, with Gardevoir as a Pokemon, really gives this deck a lot of edge. There are some problems with consistency you have to worry about, especially as there is a debate about whether to play Dunsparce in Gorebyss decks. And so far, the folks that have been playing Gardevoir Gorebyss in particular have not really been playing Dunsparce, so you have to worry about Dual Ball and finding rare candies and everything like that. However, I think Gorebyss is a great choice for the War of 04. I think that this deck absolutely can make top 8. I think it has a chance to win. You just got to get lucky on your draws. This is a best of 1 tournament, but Gorebyss is a wonderful deck. I'm going to place it solidly in the A tier. Very good choice for this tournament. All right, next up is Gardevoir. So just pure Gardevoir with the EX and the non-EX. Gardevoir back in the day in 04 was one of the top decks in the format. I think many would have called it the best deck in the format at one point. Going into the World Championships, we did not see it succeed as well in the Masters division. However, throughout the years, Gardevoir has continued to be this great, solid deck in the format. Now, as the meta has grown, of course, Gorebyss has exploded in popularity. Gardevoir, as a deck that plays Psychic Energy, does have more of a weakness to Gorebyss. Now, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a terrible matchup, but when you're accelerating your own opponent's damage by attaching to your board, combined with the fact that Gardevoir's Psyshadow does damage your Pokemon that you're attaching the energy to already, it does make things a bit more precarious. You do have some outs, such as Magneton and Lightning Energy. Some Gardevoir lists are packing in Ditto as well, and a trend that I think we will be seeing more EX decks do in general is that EX decks are playing Pokemon Nurse as a way to just heal off these massive HP Pokemon, and Gardevoir gets to take advantage of this technique as well. So we have not seen anybody play pure Gardevoir at the last year's War of 04. I don't know if we even saw it in Jay's tournament in 2021. So far, this archetype has been absent from the modern competitive 04 events, but I still believe in this deck. I still think that Gardevoir has a lot of upside. Feedback is a ridiculously phenomenal attack. It is incredible. And you just have this high HP Pokemon that can dish out massive damage. Depending on powers, makes you a bit susceptible to Muk, but you're also a Psychic type deck. So you can just gradually power up your board without even needing Delcatty or Magneton, and you can probably sweep it. So I really like Gardevoir. I'm going to place it in the B tier. I think Gardevoir is a good deck. It's still good to this day, and it's worth considering for the tournament. All right, next up is Gengar Groudon. So Gengar Groudon is the creation of good friend of the channel, Alan Naranjo. If you go back and watch the old TCG1 videos I made 7-8 years ago now, it's him that I was playing with. He came up with this deck back in the day, and somehow its legacy has persisted. It has been passed on and is now on these retro websites, so it is worth including here. I think that this was just a silly deck that Alan put together. I know that he liked the deck, but I don't remember if he really believed in it all that much. I don't see this deck as anything more than just a rogue. I think it's fun to play for a game or two, but Gengar Groudon is not a deck that I think should even be considered for the War of 04. It's not really a deck that I would play for much more than just 1 or 2 games just for fun. So, Alan, I love you. I hope you're doing well, but I will be placing Gengar Groudon in the F tier. I do not recommend seriously considering this deck. Okay, next up is Glalie. This is a fascinating deck that we have seen start to be played on TCG1. So Glalie has the Ice Wall Pokebody to reduce all damage dealt to it by 40, to reduce the damage dealt to it by 40 if the defending Pokemon has a special energy attached. There are lots of special energy flying around this format. In particular, decks like Gorebyss and Groudon basically require special energy. Blaziken is playing Warp Energy, but also it is weak to water. So Glalie is one-shotting non-EX Blazikens. It is walling out Gorebyss and Groudon decks. I think Glalie is a very fascinating anti-meta card. Now, it does have problems against decks that don't play special energy, so such as Swampert gives it a hard time. Even Gardevoir can give it trouble as well. Walrein, decks like that. But I think that if you can play the deck well and if you can hit the right matchups, Glalie does have a shot at making top 8 at this tournament. The other interesting thing about Glalie is that it has metal weakness. First of all, there are not many metal Pokemon out there. But also, there's no basic metal energy. So if you ever want to attack a Glalie with a metal Pokemon and you want to pay for metal energy, you're going to have a special energy attached. And Ice Wall is therefore reducing your damage by 40. So very interesting card. I think it's something worth being explored more. I think that it does have a place in the 04 metagame, and that I think for this tournament in particular, with decks not really teching for it, I think Glalie is a good choice for the War of 04. And I'm going to put it in the B tier. All right. Next up, we have Gorebyss Camerupt. So this deck is another take on the Gorebyss plus energy Pokemon that we have seen with Gardevoir Gorebyss, as well as Lantern Gorebyss. Camerupt is slightly different than these two. So as a stage 1, it is a bit more consistent to set up than Gardevoir, but it's more proactive than Lantern. So Lantern has to let the energy come to it. Camerupt lets you put the energy onto the board whenever you want. Additionally, it does provide a fire attacker, which is good against grass Pokemon, such as Sceptile. So anything that resists your water, Camerupt can just come in and hit it for weakness. So this is a fascinating deck. We actually saw it get top 8 at one of the 04 tournaments. It may have been War of 04, but I think it was Jay's tournament. One of these two, we saw Camerupt Gorebyss make the top 8. Very interesting deck. I think you can pair it with any number of additional attackers. I think Camerupt is a solid partner for Gorebyss in its own way. So it's a Gorebyss deck. I think you can't go wrong. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Okay. Next up is another Gorebyss deck. This is Gorebyss Jumpluff. This is a much older version of Gorebyss. This was another classic deck that has been carried on throughout the years. Jumpluff as an attacker is not very inspiring. Fluff as a Pokebody is very annoying and can definitely buy you turns if you flip the right coins. But ultimately, if you want to pair a Stage 2 Grass Pokemon with Gorebyss, I think you should pair it with Crobat. Jumpluff Gorebyss also has its fans. So, again, you might see this deck show up at the War of 04. I wouldn't be ultra surprised to see it. However, although it is a Gorebyss deck, I think there are so many other good partners for Gorebyss that I do not recommend playing Jumpluff Gorebyss in this tournament. I will be placing Jumpluff Gorebyss in the D tier. All right, another ultra classic 04 deck is Kingdra EX. Genetic Memory is such a fascinating attack, and I absolutely respect the fact that people see this card and they want to try it out. With that said, do not play this deck. This is the perfect example of a deck that people tried out at the time. Its history has been carried on through today. It's not worth it. There's very little upside to Kingdra as a deck. It has water typing, so you're hitting Blaziken for weakness, but the attacks that Genetic Memory can copy are uninspiring, and Hydro Cannon capping out at 90 damage just is not enough when you compare it to something like Swampert EX, or Blaziken EX, or Gardevoir EX, or Sceptile EX, or even something like Muk EX. So, unfortunately, Kingdra, I just do not think anyone should play this deck. I'm going to put it in the F tier. All right, Machamp Hidden Legends. So this is a fascinating deck. You get to use the Overzealous Pokebody to increase your damage against EX Pokemon. So Machamp was thought to be good at the time. People tried it. I'm sure that it got a place at Worlds 04 or 2004 Worlds. But I am not convinced. I've played against Machamp. There are several different ways folks have attempted to play this deck and to put it together, but it just doesn't do enough. As a Stage 2 Pokemon, you're dealing less damage than a Gorebyss is, and the metagame right now is a lot more geared towards non-EX Pokemon than it is for EX Pokemon. Even a deck like Blaziken does not need to put the EX into play. In fact, I would say probably more than half of the time, Blaziken is never putting the EX onto the board. And otherwise, the only other decks that truly need the EX to attack are decks like Sceptile or Swampert or Vileplume. Maybe you're doing okay there, but I am not sold that the metagame is good enough for Machamp to exist. So it's not the worst deck I've ever seen. Unfortunately, Machamp just doesn't get there the way that it should, so I'm going to be placing it in the D tier. All right, here it is, the champion of the 2004 World Championships, as well as the deck of choice for Robin Schultz to win both last year's War of 04 and Jay's 2021 tournament. The big, bad Magma itself. Oh, man. You know, I've had differing opinions on this deck over the years, but ultimately I keep coming back to just this one core thought about Magma. This deck wins games. It is a 100 HP single prize basic Pokemon that is two-shotting everything, possibly one-shotting. You have the phenomenal package of Claydol and Camerupt to keep your energy flowing throughout the game. And the biggest boon to this deck really is its ability to use Pokemon Reversal to stay aggressive in the early game and to play many copies of Mr. Briney's Compassion to reset your damaged Groudons, save the damage, save the energy, save the prize cards, and just keep the attacks going. What else can I say? Magma is by far, without a doubt, an S-tier deck. I think that if any deck is going to win War of 04, it's the most likely to be Magma or Blaziken Ditto. These are going to be the only two decks in my S tier, by the way. I'm just spoiling it right now. Magma by far deserves to be there. You cannot go wrong playing Magma in this tournament if you're not sure what to play. All right, next up, another classic Gorebyss variant. This is Metabyss, combining Metagross and Gorebyss. I am not super high on this deck. I know several folks, I have several friends who adore this deck and love to play it. For me, it's just a pretty underwhelming Gorebyss variant. Metagross as an attacker is not very inspiring since it relies on coin flips. Being psychic is nice. That does help against a deck like Muk, but also you have to actually be able to attack it, which would require you to attach your energy and not get them removed, as well as to actually flip heads on your attacks. So I'm sorry, Metabyss. I don't think you're the worst deck in the world. I think folks should try it out, but I think in today's metagame, Metabyss just is not good enough. I do not recommend playing this deck for the War of 04, and so I will be placing it in the D tier. All right, Miracle Sphere Gamma. So this is a deck that has recently been being played on TCG1. The idea is to use Miracle Sphere to inflict statuses on your opponent and spread damage everywhere. So I have seen this card be paired with Celio in order to continue the spread damage, as well as Lantern to soak up the energy and to keep paying for the very unique energy cost of Miracle Sphere. Listen, I think that this deck is significant enough to be put on the tier list. I'm not going to rule it out entirely. However, and in fact, I'll even say this. It has beat me before. I've lost games to this deck. I've seen it beat other players. With that said, the idea is really neat. I just don't think it is there enough to be at a tournament level. So I'm going to be placing this deck in the D tier. It's pretty cool. I think you should try it out on your own, at least see it in action, but I would not play it for the War of 04. All right. Medicham Lantern Bayonet. So this is MLB. This is the classic archetype that Pablo Mesa took to top 32 at Worlds 2004. I think Adam Capriola may have played this deck as well, or a variation of it. Maybe that was just Medicham Lantern. So this was a cool deck. When I first was learning about 04, this was a deck that I gravitated towards. Medicham Lantern and Bayonet all do unique things. They all pair together really nicely as just a really cool stage 2 box. With that said, I think there are better ways to take this idea. In particular, I think if you just take MLB and you swap one of these Pokemon out for Gorebyss, you just have a better deck. So while I love MLB and I think that it is good enough to be played in the tournament, I think there are just better options out there. And so I'm going to be placing it in the C tier. It's not a bad deck, but I think you can probably do better. Speaking of doing better then, how about MLG? So this is Medicham Lantern Gorebyss. We're just replacing the Bayonet with the Gorebyss. This is my favorite deck in the 2004 formats. I will be completely upfront about that. I think MLG has so much going for it. You have the combination of Medicham or of Lantern and Gorebyss to keep the energy streaming, and Medicham as a supplemental attacker just unlocks such massive damage potential for your board. Meditate is an attack that should not be slept on. I love using Meditate against EX decks. Just bash in with a Mystic Water to whatever is in front of you. If they knock out your Gorebyss, send up a Medicham and just Meditate to handle the rest of it and take the knockout. And then, of course, there's Chakra points. So 10 damage plus 10 for each card in your opponent's hand. Now, there are a lot of decks that do like to play Desert Shaman and Hand Disruption, but there are even more decks that just love to draw their cards. And so if your opponent's hand gets too big, Medicham can do wonders to just clean things up for you. In particular, I love using Medicham in the Magma matchup. Being able to one-shot a Groudon without needing a bunch of energy in play is very nice. In particular, I think the Gorebyss Groudon matchup is fascinating. I think it's relatively even, but as the game progresses, as time moves on, the game is favored towards Magma. Gorebyss really needs a nice early start to really pressure these Groudons before they can get going. And so I think Medicham does a good job slotting in there as an early to mid game attacker while your Gorebysses are steadily applying pressure. So I love MLG. I personally think it is the most well-rounded of the Gorebyss archetypes. It has a little bit of everything you could possibly want. And so with that, I will be placing this in the A tier. I think MLG is a phenomenal deck. We saw Drew Allen get top 8 at the World of 4 with it. Other folks have played it as well. I think it is a very, very solid trio combination. And now that we've seen these ideas here, so comparing Medicham Lantern Gorebyss to Banette Lantern Gorebyss, I just think that the Medicham has that extra firepower that you need in matchups where Gorebyss can't help you out, whereas Banette is better at picking apart the lower HP matchups such as the Gorebyss Mirror that you might encounter. All right, next up is Muk. So what can I say about Muk? The power lock is crazy. It's disruptive. It's tanky. It attacks your board. It attacks your hand. It prevents your retreat cost. It heals. This is a great deck. I'll admit, I think it's annoying to play against, but I can't deny how good it is. Muk is one of the pillars of the modern 2004 metagame, and as a result, I have no choice but to put it in the A tier. It is an amazing deck. All right, next up are the Sceptile variants. So first, let's talk about pure Sceptile. Sceptile as a deck is so fascinating because if you've ever played it, if you ever played against it, Sceptile can create board states where you feel absolutely helpless. The combination of Green Heal and Pokemon Nurse is absolutely oppressive, and the water resistance also is very nice against Gorebyss decks. Just, man, Sceptile as a deck, if it can hit the right matchups, it can absolutely pulverize its opponent and show them no mercy at all. However, there is one huge weakness, and that's the weakness of Sceptile, Fire type. Sceptile's Blaziken matchup is really tough. It's super tough. It's so bad that the presence of Blaziken in the 04 metagame single-handedly pushes Sceptile out. Now, it doesn't push Sceptile out entirely. I still think Sceptile is a great deck. However, you really need to dodge Blaziken if you want to play this deck in the War of 04. If you think that you can go through your entire day picking apart Magma and Gorebyss and all the other decks we've talked about today and dodge the Blazikens, you might be the next War of 04 champion. So I'm going to put Sceptile in the B tier. It's just too matchup dependent to make its way into the A tier. But again, if you can dodge your Blaziken, if you can dodge it, you're in for a really good time. Okay, so if your Blaziken matchup is so bad, what if you try to fix it? So Sceptile Gardevoir is an idea that Jay Hornung has talked about online a little bit. The idea is that Gardevoir is a good card against Blaziken. Feedback is a phenomenal attack. Psystorm does weakness on the Blaziken EX. So Gardevoir has a good matchup into Blaziken. So put the Gardevoir inside Sceptile, and now you have a good counter to Blaziken. I think this is an interesting idea. I have not played this deck myself. I have not seen this deck in action. So admittedly, I am working purely off of theory when I rank this deck. Jay seems to believe in it. I think we have the same analysis, which is that consistency is this deck's biggest issue. You're adding more Stage 2 Pokemon to a Sceptile deck already, and you need to find your energy when you need it, and you need to actually get your Gardevoir up if you do find yourself against Blaziken. So there's a lot of moving parts. It's a very delicate house of cards you have to build. I see the vision, and without having played it myself, I don't see a reason to denounce this deck at all. So I'm also going to be placing it in the B tier. Just based on what I've seen, it seems like an overall weaker version of Sceptile, but with a better Blaziken matchup. So this is something worth considering if you want to try Sceptile for the tournament. I'll put it in the B tier. Okay, next up here is Shedinja. So Shedinja is another one of those annoying wall Pokemon. I'm sure you can tell based on this Pokemon's history. So Shedinja has Wonder Guard, which prevents all damage from evolved Pokemon and EX Pokemon. So the key to Shedinja is that most decks in the metagame rely on one of those two. Blaziken uses evolved Pokemon, Muk is an evolved EX, Gorebyss uses evolved Pokemon, and while Shedinja has 30 HP, the Pokemon that these decks run that can attack Shedinja don't do very much. So for example, Clamperl only does 20 damage, and Shedinja decks typically play healing to heal off anything that does less than 30. So basically, in order to beat Shedinja, you need to have a basic single prize Pokemon that can do 30 damage in a single hit. There are some Pokemon that fit that criteria, but it's surprisingly not that many. So in particular, the 50 HP Skitty with the blue background in its art does have double edge for 30 damage. So there has been some talk about which Skitty is better in the format. So historically, folks played the 40 HP Skitty with minor errand running, but now there's also this 50 HP Skitty with double edge. Maybe you play both. Maybe you play a 1-1 split like we saw in the Dan Z Mew12 Blaziken decks at the War of 04. So that's an answer to Shedinja right there. Additionally, there are just other random Pokemon out there like Trico. Ditto also seems like an answer, but Shedinja can heal it off as long as they don't put any damage on the Ditto. So this really comes down to seeing if your opponent has prepared for the deck or not. I think an unskilled player who is just not very familiar with Shedinja or has not prepared their deck for that way can get caught out, but it definitely is matchup roulette for Shedinja. So I'm going to put it in the C tier. I wouldn't be super surprised if someone played this deck to the tournament. I just don't think it belongs any higher than C tier. All right, next up is Shiftry. Classic deck, such a cool deck. Both of Shiftry's attacks are great, and they're fun in their own unique way. Really, just the problem with Shiftry is that fighting weakness. So your Magma matchup is cooked, and as well as your Swampert matchup. And the damage output is there, but for a stage 2 single prize Pokemon, you just end up needing more. This is another deck that I expect someone will play to the tournament. It's good enough to warrant considering for a tournament, but unfortunately, our poor guy has to be relegated to C tier. Its Groudon matchup is just so bad, and that alone should heavily weigh on your choice to play Shiftry. All right, next up is Swampert. I am very excited for this deck. This is a deck that I've been working on for the last few months now. I really do think Swampert right now is in a good place in the format. It does have a bad Muk matchup, won't deny that, but Sceptile is fast, it's hard hitting, and it has high HP. So the version I play is a version that relies on putting energy on the Swampert, as well as playing multiple copies of Pokemon Nurse to just keep healing that damage off and just go aggressive with it. I've also seen a variant be played with Turbo Swampert that is just full spam energy, spam energy, spam energy, and it goes very fast. So I'd be interested to see if that shows up as well. Unfortunately, I don't know if my touting of Swampert has been enough to actually get someone to play it for this tournament, but I would love to see someone play Swampert at the War of 04. And if I were playing in this tournament, Swampert is the deck that I would choose to play. It's just so fun, and it can just win games. Just avoid Muk if you can. So for that reason, we're going to put it in the B tier. I think Swampert is a good deck, just doesn't quite reach that A tier yet. Okay, next up is Gorebyss Mewtwo EX, aka Thundercats. This was a creation by friend of the channel, Jimmy Ballard, who took this deck to a top cut finish at the 2004 World Championships. I'm sorry, Jimmy. I do not think this deck is good right now. Mewtwo EX seems like a pretty intuitive partner for Gorebyss. You can flood psychic energy onto the board to increase your damage. Ironically, though, this gives this deck a bad Gorebyss matchup because you're just flooding energy onto the board for your opponent to take advantage of. So you have a bad Gorebyss matchup. Mewtwo EX has 100 HP, which means that Desert Ruins hurts you. So not only does an opponent's Desert Ruins hurt, but that means you cannot play Desert Ruins yourself. And Mewtwo hitting for 60 damage just isn't quite there. 70 HP is kind of the magic number with Gorebyss decks running around, so you'll probably have to play a bunch of Strength Charms if you want to get there. Now, I will give the deck some credit. I think Mewtwo EX is a really, really good Muk counter. Energy absorption, and then hit it in. You're one-shotting Muks for only 3 energy, which isn't super difficult to power up. Energy absorption gets around energy removal, so you do have a very, very good Muk matchup, but at the cost of everything else about this deck being worse than nearly every other Gorebyss deck there is. So I am going to put this deck in the D tier. It's still a Gorebyss deck, so at the end of the day, I'm sure you can still win games, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think there are other better options for you to try out. Okay, next up is Vileplume. So this is the classic item lock Vileplume. I guess you'd call it trainer lock. So this card is good. There are 2 different variants that I have encountered. So the first one is like a turn 2 Vileplume. This deck just gets Vileplume up as soon as possible and just item locks while it attacks. It's great. It works well when you pull it off, and its HP and damage output are enough to be challenging to take care of. Vileplume also does not have fire weakness, which is very much in the deck's favor. It only has a psychic weakness. So I think Vileplume is a good choice. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Vileplume Sceptile then is a Vileplume deck that also plays Sceptile to spam Pokemon Nurse and to keep healing your Vileplume. Some decks also play it with a Sceptile EX, some just play it with Energy Trans. So this version is probably even more annoying than the pure Vileplume version. Pure Vileplume still has Blossom to heal, but comparing that with Energy Trans and Pokemon Nurse is crazy. So this deck's also great. I'm also going to put it in the B tier. The thing that's stopping Vileplume from going into A tier is just the fact that this deck sometimes just doesn't work. I think you have to actually play it for yourself to come to this conclusion, but I've interacted with several folks who have tested Vileplume with the intent to play it in a tournament and given up on it because it just has those games where things go wrong, and in a best of one event, you can't really rely on the deck enough sometimes. So if you believe in Vileplume, I very much think you can succeed, but I think that it is a bit too inconsistent to go into the A tier, but still a great deck. Eager to see how it performs at the tournament. Okay, next up is Wailord. Classic deck. Shout out to Colin Mull. Top 8 at Worlds. Wailord is a very cool deck. So, super deep dive heals your Wailord. You go run and hide into fossils while you heal up, and then you Dwindling Wave for 100 damage, which is enough to knock out most things in one hit. The downside of Wailord is that it has a pretty tough Blaziken matchup. So Blaziken just snipes around really hard. Once they put 100 damage on your Wailord, it can't deal damage anymore. So although Wailord is a water Pokemon that does 100 base damage, it actually has a tough Blaziken matchup. Additionally, other decks that can snipe Wailord have a very good time against it. So Swampert EX, for example, with Crushing Wave. And decks like Muk can use Pokemon Reversal to drag it up and deal damage before it has a chance to attack. Of course, anything with water resistance, such as Sceptile, also gives Wailord a tough time. Additionally, Wailord has Lightning and Grass weakness, so any lightning attacks from such as Magneton or Lantern can give it trouble as well. Wailord is great against decks that just have a hard time piercing through the fossils quickly enough and spamming Dwindling Wave into Super Deep Dive. If they can't one-shot the Wailord, it can have a really hard time. Classically, Gardevoir has a brutal Wailord matchup. So do most Gorebyss variants. If you're not playing a Lightning type in your Gorebyss deck, you're probably going to be losing to Wailord. Wailord also has a good Magma matchup because you're one-shotting the Groudons and linear attack gets healed off by Blossom. So Wailord's matchups in this metagame are very polarizing. Either they are very good or very bad. I do think Wailord is good enough to play in the tournament, and I would love to see someone pull off a Wailord, I think with the right matchups and with the right lists as well. If we see a more modernized take on Wailord, maybe someone can unlock the formula to making Wailord as good as it used to be. But I think for now, it's going to go in the C tier. I think it's worth playing or considering playing, but You just got to know what you're getting yourself into. Okay, speaking of Walrein, another classic deck that has seen its presence in the metagame dwindle over time. So Walrein's biggest problem is very clear. It auto loses to Blossom. Blossom has minus 30 water resistance, and then it heals itself for 20. So all 50 damage get wiped away, and Walrein just cannot do anything about that. With that said, I think Walrein is in a better place in the current metagame than some might think, because Blossom as a card has fallen out of popularity. Some decks still play it, and any stage 2 deck can play Blossom, but for the most part, folks haven't really been playing it. So if you can dodge decks playing Blossom, I think Walrein has a lot of potential. You use Pokemon Reversal to bring other folks' Pokemon up. You can play Ditto as an alternate attacker in certain matchups. You can accelerate to the Ditto with Crush Draw. You can play Bryony to heal, and Celio's spread attack is also very appealing to the deck. So I believe in Walrein. I think I believe in Walrein more than most other people do right now, but I do think that it is viable enough to play in this tournament. I think that once upon a time, I would have put it in the B tier. And when I say once upon a time, I mean like maybe a month ago. But looking at this metagame a bit harder, thinking about Walrein's place here, I do think Walrein is going to need to get lucky on its matchups and lucky on its coin flips. You got to hit heads on sheer cold if you want to even win. So I do think Walrein is worth considering for the tournament. I do think that Walrein is good enough to be played in the tournament, but for now, I am going to be placing it in the C tier. Okay, Wigglytuff EX. Somehow this deck has made it onto PTCG Legends list of decks, so I'm talking about it here. Don't play it. That's the end of the sentence. Sorry, Wigglytuff. Don't play it. All right, the final deck I have here is what I am calling XMG. So this is Zatu, Medicham, Gorebyss. This is an archetype that I saw someone playing on TCG1, and I was very intrigued by it. So I have not played this deck myself, but the potential seems there. So the idea is that you play heavier accounts of Medicham and Gorebyss, and then Zatu is a nice partner to be able to heal damage off of your Pokemon. Medicham in particular, with its 80 HP, can be a little bit difficult to take out, so using Zatu can do a great job there. And Zatu's attack puts a damage count on all of your opponent's Pokemon, so being able to spread can be nice in a pinch. It gets around double rainbow. I think Zatu might have free retreat. If not, it has one retreat, but I think it has free retreat. And putting damage everywhere also increases your meditate damage later on, or it can set up math for Shocker Points or Mystic Water. So I think this idea has a lot of potential. Again, I have not yet tried it, but I do think the vision is there. I see the potential here. I think that if whoever played this deck feels good about their choice and wants to play it in the War of 04, I fully support it. This is an idea that I would like to test in the future. So after this, after the tournament, I will try this deck out and see what is there. For now, I'm going to put it in the C tier. I do think that it is worth considering for the tournament. All right, so this is my tier list for the 2004 metagame as we see it. Once again, S tier, these are the decks that I think are by far the best decks in the format, the most likely to win the tournament. Maybe now this is where I talk about this. So I think going into the format, going into the tournament, the metagame right now has 4 pillars, 4 decks that everything else has to consider. Blaziken, Magma, Gorebyss, and Muk. Of course, Gorebyss is an umbrella term for like 10 different variants, as we've seen here. But in general, Gorebyss, Muk, Magma, and Blaziken are the 4 decks that every other deck has to keep in mind. I do think Groudon and Blaziken are slightly better equipped in this metagame than Muk and Gorebyss, which is why these 2 are going in the S tier. But overall, these 4 decks really are the 4 decks to beat and the 4 decks to consider playing as you play in the 04 metagame. So any other thoughts here? Let me look around. I didn't order the tiers super carefully in terms of within the tier. I do think Muk is slightly above. Actually, I think all of these are equal. So the ordering in the tiers does not mean much right now. Basically, I'm just saying if you're playing a deck in S, A, or B, I think you have a great chance at making top 8. If you're playing a deck in the C tier, I think you will do fine at the War of 04. I think top 8 is probably your ceiling, though, if you can even get there. D and F are decks that I do not recommend playing at the War of 04. Decks in the D tier, I think, are worth playing casually. Decks in F tier, I think, should not be played ever, period. So this is my tier list. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, the War of 04 is tomorrow. Check out the link in the description if you want to register and compete for yourself, or check out the stream if you would like to watch the broadcast. Once again, I'll be commentating it alongside Kara Quaren. Very excited to see you there tomorrow. If you want to make your own tier list for this format, I have put the link for the tier maker in the description. Please do it. I would love to hear your thoughts on the metagame, either your own tier list or any thoughts on my tier list as well. Anything you agree with, anything you disagree with? Am I a little too optimistic about certain decks or a little too down on others? Let me know. Let's start some great discussion. As always, thanks for watching. Look out for more retro content coming soon, and I'll see you all next time.